Hello, I'm Alma Angeles, and you're watching Eagle News International. On tonight's headlines. The U.S. reported a record 1.35 million new COVID cases. And the 81-year-old director of National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, Dr. Anthony Fauci, slammed vaccine skeptic Republican Senator Paul Rand for unleashing crazies who were threatening his life and harassing his family in an unusually emotional congressional testimony. World Health Organization Country Representative Dr. Rabindra Ayebelesinghe said there's no need to raise the alert level in the NCR for now. And the World Bank Group said that the global economy is entering a pronounced slowdown amid fresh threats from COVID-19 variants and a rise in inflation debt and income inequality that could endanger the recovery in emerging and developing economies. And the Omicron variant is spreading rapidly around the world. More than half of people in Europe are now on track to contract the Omicron coronavirus variant in the next 2 months if infections continue at current rates, according to the head of the WHO's Europe region. Now, let's take a look now in the U.S. The United States reported a record 1.35 million new COVID cases. Though Omicron causes severe cases at a lower rate than Delta, it is reaching more people because of its extreme infectiousness. By December 27, the age-adjusted vaccine efficacy against hospitalization was 92%, according to data from the New York State. Scientists, meanwhile, are seeing signals that the Omicron-driven wave may have peaked in the United Kingdom, and the U.S. is about to follow suit. Britain reported 120,821 new cases of COVID-19 on Tuesday, a significant drop from 142,224 infections on Monday, according to government data, but the experts warn that there is still much uncertainty over the course of the pandemic. And despite soaring cases and record-high COVID-19 hospitalizations, the United States is approaching the threshold of transitioning to living with the coronavirus as a manageable disease that, according to Dr. Anthony Fauci, speaking to the Center for Strategic and International Studies, the top U.S. scientist said eliminating COVID was unrealistic. Take a look.
There's no way we're going to eradicate this. We've only done it with one infection, and that's smallpox. It's no way, I believe, likely, aspirational, but not likely that we're going to eliminate it because A, it has a high degree of transmissibility, B, variants arise, and C, there are so many people that are unvaccinated. And we eliminated polio because we got almost everybody vaccinated. We eliminated measles because we got almost everybody vaccinated. So what's the box that we're all looking at now? That box is control, namely getting the level of infection that causes severe disease low enough that we can incorporate this infection. Some people have said learning to live with it, that I believe we are possibly approaching that. Now, the reason I say possibly is that we still now have close to 1 million infections a day. We have 150,000 people in the hospital, and over 1,200 to 1,300 die. So we're not at that point where this is an acceptable, let's live with it now. But I believe we will get there.
Now, official data show there are currently 145,982 COVID hospitalizations, even though a significant percent are thought to be hospitalized with the disease rather than because of it. Earlier, the 81-year-old director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases slammed vaccine skeptic Republican Senator Rand Paul for unleashing the crazies who were threatening his life and harassing his family in an unusually emotional congressional testimony. Let's listen in.
Were they were describing, oh, there's no way this could have come
That was
from the lab.
not me. What I did.
Did you talk with any of those scientists
but
privately?
you keep distorting the truth. It is stunning how you do that.
Did you talk to any of the scientists?
You personally attack me, and with absolutely not a shred of evidence of anything you say. So I would like to make something clear to the committee. He's doing this for political reasons.
Do you think lockdowns were good for our kids? Do you think we slowed down the death rate? More people have died now under President Biden than did under President Trump. You are the one responsible. You are the architect. You are the lead architect for the response from the government, and now 800,000 people have died.
Right.
So you think it's a winning success, what you've advocated for government?
Senator, first of all, if you look at everything that I said, you accuse me of in a monolithic way telling people what they need to do. Everything that I've said has been in support of the CDC guidelines. What happens when he gets out and accuses me of things that are completely untrue is that all of a sudden that kindles the crazies out there, and I have threats upon my life, harassment of my family and my children with obscene phone calls because people are lying about me. A person was arrested who was on their way from Sacramento to Washington, D.C. at a speed stop in Iowa. And the police asked him where he was going, and he was going to Washington, D.C. to kill Dr. Fauci. And they found in his car an AR-15 and multiple magazines of ammunition because he thinks that maybe I'm killing people. So I ask myself, why would Senator want to do this? So go to Rand Paul website and you see fire Dr. Fauci with a little box that says contribute here. You can do $5, $10, $20, $100. So you are making a catastrophic epidemic for your political gain.
Here in the country, the Philippines logged 32,246 new coronavirus infections and 5,063 recoveries today. The latest COVID-19 bulletin showed that there are 208,164 active cases, while total recoveries rose to 2,797,816 or 91.5% of the 3,058,634 infections since the pandemic started in March 2020. Wednesday's tally of fresh cases is higher than Tuesday's 28,007. The regions with the most cases in the recent 2 weeks were the National Capital Region, or NCR, with 17,902, or 56% of new infections, Calabarzon, or Region 4A, with 6,838 or 22%, and Central Luzon with 3,268 or 10%. The death toll is now 52,654 with 144 new deaths, representing 1.72% of overall cases. Staying in the country, the current alert level imposed by the government in the National Capital Region may be adequate, as the country's healthcare system would be able to manage the surge in COVID infections until January 27 or 28. That, according to World Health Organization country representative Dr. Rabindra Abeyasinghe today. Now, with the surge in cases, especially in the NCR, the government is expected to decide within the week whether to retain the current alert level 3 or tighten it to alert level 4 from January 16 to the 31st. Take a look.
Current alert level 3, and as I mentioned earlier, we are seeing a significant reduction in mobility. And if yesterday's reduction in numbers is an indication, maybe the current alert levels are adequate. We are very conscious that we will need to increase those alert levels and increase the restrictions only if we see signs of the healthcare system being overwhelmed. Right now, we don't see that. Our projections are that the Philippines may be able to avert that even if current trends are continued till about the end of this month, meaning that red line analysis that we have done projects that we can manage the health system till about the 27th, 28th of January, given the trends up to yesterday. With yesterday's decline, we may be even to manage beyond that.
Beasinga noted keeping the economy open and taking the best approach in addressing the uptrend in cases are crucial. Meanwhile, the Canadian province of Quebec, struggling to control the Omicron variant, will impose a new health tax in the coming weeks on those who are not vaccinated against COVID-19. We are working on a health contribution for all the adults who are refusing to get vaccinated because they represent a financial burden for all Quebecans, according to Quebec Premier François Legault. He said that 10% of Quebecans who have not yet received any vaccine doses must not harm the 90% who have. He said that those who are unvaccinated for medical reasons will be exempt from the move. But Eric Duhaime, the head of Quebec's Conservative Opposition Party, decried the provincial government's anti-COVID strategy, tweeting that the new fee would only divide Quebecans. The head of Quebec's Liberal Party, Dominique Anglade, who is herself in favor of mandatory vaccine, called the tax a distraction. Meanwhile, President Vladimir Putin on Wednesday said Russia had 2 weeks to prepare for a fresh wave of coronavirus infections driven by the Omicron variant after the WHO warned of a surge in Europe. We see what is happening in the world, the Russian leader told a meeting of cabinet ministers Wednesday. We have at least a couple of weeks to prepare. Russia has lifted nearly all the restrictions designed to limit new cases. Despite an increasing caseload and growing Omicron infections, it is currently the worst-hit country in Europe in terms of virus-related deaths. He urged Prime Minister Mikhail Mishustin to increase domestic vaccination rates, including with Russia's Sputnik V, which the Kremlin chief said was perhaps more efficient than other vaccines used globally. Russia's statistic agency said in December that some 87,000 people had died from the coronavirus in November alone, bringing the country's total pandemic-related deaths to more than 600,000, nearly twice the official figure given by government website. And the spread of the Omicron variant is pushing COVID towards being an endemic disease that humanity can live with, although it remains a pandemic for now. That is according to the EU's drug watchdog. The European Space Agency, or the European Medicines Agency rather, also expressed doubts about giving a fourth vaccine shot to the general population, saying repeated boosters were not a sustainable strategy. Let's listen in.
Yeah, of course, we don't know, nobody knows exactly when we'll be at the end of the tunnel, but we will be there. And what is important and what we are seeing is that we are moving towards, indeed, the virus becoming more endemic. But I think we cannot say that we have already reached that status. So the virus is still behaving as a pandemic virus, and the Omicron emergence is clearly showing that. So we should not forget we are still in a pandemic. Nevertheless, with the increase of the immunity in the population and with Omicron, there will be a lot of natural immunity taking place on top of vaccination. We will be fastly moving towards a scenario that will be closer to endemicity. I've not been saying that this is necessarily a good thing, because actually we're extremely concerned about the burden of disease that will be carried by the huge amount of cases that will be occurring now in the European Union with Omicron. And as said, even if severity might be lower, unfortunately, many individuals will get hospitalized. So we have to be prepared of the consequences of such a wave. And the fact that this virus is so transmissible, it means that a lot of people will get exposed, and many even asymptomatically, which means that this will confer a natural boosting to the immunity of all of us, which will be important for the sake of building this extra layer of immunity that could lead then to endemicity. Yeah, indeed. There are two concerns here. Is that if we have a strategy in which we give boosters, let's say, every 4 months approximately, we will end up potentially having problem with the immune response, and the immune response may end up not being as good as we would like it to be. So we should be careful in not overloading the immune system with repeated immunization. And
Meanwhile, the UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson faced a furious backlash over new claims of a breach of coronavirus restrictions by his team on top of a slew of recent scandals. Take a look as the UK Paymaster General Michael Ellis answers an urgent question in Parliament aimed at Boris Johnson as the British Prime Minister faces a furious backlash over new claims of a breach of coronavirus restrictions by his team in May 2020, when more than 100 people reportedly received an email invitation to a drinks party to which guests, allegedly including Johnson and his wife Carrie, were encouraged to bring your own booze. Take a look.
The government has committed to publishing the findings of the investigation and providing these to Parliament in the normal way. The terms of reference set out that where there are credible allegations relating to other gatherings, it is open for those to be investigated. And I can confirm to the House, Mr. Speaker, that this includes the allegations relating to the 15th and 20th of May 2020. It will establish the facts. And if wrongdoing is established, there will be requisite disciplinary action taken.
And the Minister, quite frankly, hides behind the Grey investigation. There's no need for an investigation into the simple, central question today. Did the Prime Minister attend the event in the Downing Street Garden on the 20th of May 2020? It won't wash, Mr. Speaker, to blame this on a few junior civil servants. The Prime Minister sets the tone.
Speaker, in Northern Ireland we reached a milestone of 3,000 deaths due to COVID just last week. 3,000 people who followed the rules and grieved today. So will the Paymaster, including my mother-in-law who died alone, will the Paymaster General confirm that there will be a full and complete disclosure to enable the police service to ascertain it all was done decently and within the regulations at the date and at that time? I'm sorry, Mr. Speaker.
The Prime Minister should come here now, fess up and tell us what happened.
After all of this, does the Minister not feel embarrassed that the Prime Minister hasn't got the decency to resign?
And he will decide himself. It is time to go. For goodness sake, man, go.
We were in contact with the Cabinet Office about the May 2020 gathering in the garden of Johnson's Downing Street residence and office, raising the possibility of a more serious criminal probe. British media and social networks were filled with recollections from people who said they stuck to the rules even as family and friends were sick or dying from COVID, and the fury at the apparent double standards. Police at the time fined those breaching the rules and had the option to prosecute repeat or egregious offenders. ITV News, which obtained the email, said some 40 staff ended up gathering in the garden that evening, eating picnic food and even drinking. And from the last update, Prime Minister Boris Johnson has apologized. And the news continues here on Eagle News. We'll be right back.
Alam namin ang iyong pagsisikap. Dama namin ang iyong mga sakripisyo. Kita namin ang pagharap mo sa bawat pagsubok. Kaya sa kabila ng mga hamon ng buhay, nandito kami para umalalay. Kasi katulad mo, gusto rin namin ang magandang bukas para sa kanya. Hatid namin ang dekalidad na edukasyon at makabagong pasilidad sa abot kayang halaga. Kaya huwag ka na mangamba. Sasamahan ka namin tuparin ang mga pangarap niya. Maaasahan mong sulit dito ang mga pinagsikapan mo. Sa aming mga makabagong pasilidad at sistema ng edukasyon. Ay lalabas natin ang aking talino at mga kakayahan niya. Kahit sa munting halaga, makakasiguro ka na makakasabay siya sa mabilis na pag-ikot ng mundo. Sa New Era, karamay mo kami sa bawat hamon. Kaagapay mo kami sa bawat hakbang. Kasama mo kami sa bawat ngiti at tagumpay.
Mula noon hanggang ngayon, gabay natin ang MTRCB ratings sa matalino at responsableng panonood. Sa tamang pagsunod sa MTRCB ratings, ginagawa nating ligtas at makabuluhan ang panonood ng bawat miyembro ng pamilyang Pilipino. Lumipas man ang panahon, hanggang may pamilyang Pilipino, andyan ang MTRCB.
Sa ating pong lipunan, hindi na mawawala ang mga samot-saring problema. Kaya tuloy lamang pong pag-aksyon, paghahanap ng solusyon. Lalo na ngayon, may maaasahan ka ng re-responde. Sabado, alas 6 hanggang alas 7 ng gabi. Ito ang Responde, mata ng mamamayan.
Welcome back. Kim Jong-un personally oversaw the successful test of a hypersonic missile, according to state media today, and urged North Korea to press ahead with building more strategic military muscle despite international sanctions over its nuclear weapons program. Pictures in state media showed Kim using binoculars to observe the second missile launch by the nuclear-armed nation in less than a week. Hypersonic missiles are listed among the top priority tasks for strategic weapons development in North Korea's five-year plan. It was the third reported North Korean test of a hypersonic gliding missile. The first, which took place 4 months ago, was followed by one last week. The missile flew 700 kilometers at an altitude of about 60 kilometers at Mach 10 speed, according to Seoul's Joint Chiefs of Staff. Hypersonic missiles travel at speeds of at least Mach 5 times the speed of sound, and can maneuver mid-flight, making them harder to track and intercept. Now, experts say they're doubtful the weapons was that advanced, and South Korea says it does have the ability to intercept the kind of missile North Korea launched. Analysts say North Korea launches missiles like this to show off its military power and to get attention from international governments and the media. Meanwhile, across the Pacific, the launch was followed by some confusion in U.S. airspace. The Federal Aviation Administration, or FAA, revealed it had temporarily paused departures at some airports along the West Coast on Monday evening local time after the launch. Let's listen in.
So I won't speak to any precautionary measures that the FAA might take. I understand that they put out a statement to this effect, that they did this out of an abundance of caution. As you alluded to, full operations resumed within 15 minutes, and the FAA is reviewing the process around this ground stop.
The United Nations and partners have launched a more than $5 billion funding appeal for Afghanistan to shore up collapsing basic services there. 22 million people need assistance inside the country, and 5.7 million more require help beyond its borders, according to humanitarians. In Geneva, UN Emergency Relief Coordinator Martin Griffiths said that $4.4 billion was needed to pay health workers and others directly, not the de facto authorities. Again, let's listen in.
We think this is a viable plan, it's a fundable plan, it's one that we can deliver on, and frankly, it's one that I think the world has decided that we need to deliver on if we are to prevent further suffering for those people in Afghanistan who have had such an extraordinary experience these last 2 decades. But what we will see is distress at the family level, deaths at the family level, hunger, which makes people lose hope, movement, further displacement, external displacement, even more difficult than internal displacement, and most particularly, if I may say so, robbing the people of Afghanistan in a hope that their country will be their home and support.
Meanwhile, UNICEF said it was distributing winterization kits in different provinces of Afghanistan to vulnerable families with pregnant and lactating women, families with children with disabilities, female-headed households, and others. According to UNICEF, Afghanistan was already one of the most dangerous places in the world to be a child over the past year. The situation has become even more desperate as conflict, drought, and COVID-19 have collided to create a humanitarian emergency. In other news, Hong Kong will create a host of new national security crimes, according to the city's leader today, as she presided over the first session of a new Patriots-only legislature scrubbed of political opposition. The legislation will add to a sweeping national security law imposed directly on Hong Kong by Beijing that has transformed the international finance hub and empowered authorities to carry out a widespread crackdown on dissent. Take a look.
基本法23條嘅立法工作咧係香港嘅憲制嘅職能不能再拖我亦都公開講咗好多次咧，我哋係要馬上跟進有關於呢個23條嘅本地嘅立法嘅工作。全國人大常委會喺6月30號制定讓我哋實施嘅香港國安法係一條立得非常之好嘅法律我哋而家用咗1年半落嚟，早期佢嘅作用咧就係止暴制亂。學你話齋，即刻回復正常。而家嘅作用咧係定海神針啲人會知道係有後果嘅，所以按住國安法嘅要求咧，我哋係要防範、制止、懲處防範做得越好咧，就 懲處就可以做少啲嚇。咁所以基本法23條立法嘅工作同樣咧係要立一條好嘅法律嚇。
The current national security law defines 4 crimes: secession, subversion, terrorism, and colluding with foreign forces, and offenders can face up to life in prison. But on Wednesday, Chief Executive Carrie Lam confirmed that her government would create new local legislation that meets Article 23 of Hong Kong's mini constitution, which calls for the city to pass its own national security laws. China imposed its own security law after huge and sometimes violent democracy protests swept Hong Kong in 2019, saying it was needed to restore order and would only affect a tiny minority. In 2003, an attempt by Hong Kong's government to pass its own national security law sparked large protests and was eventually aborted, which is why Beijing imposed a law directly on the city in 2020. It is unlikely the city government will face much opposition now in passing the new law. To the U.S. now, where President Joe Biden took a major political gamble in calling for a break in the Senate supermajority rule so that Democrats can override Republican opposition to voting rights reforms that he called crucial to saving U.S. democracy. Again, let's listen in.
But as an institutionalist, I believe that the threat to our democracy is so grave that we must find a way to pass these voting rights bills. Debate them, vote, let the majority prevail. And if that bare minimum is blocked, we have no option but to change the Senate rules, including getting rid of the filibuster for this. Each one of the members of the Senate is going to be judged by history. I know where I stand. I will not yield. I will not flinch. I will defend the right to vote, our democracy against all enemies, foreign and, yes, domestic.
The 50 Democrats in the Senate support the 2 bills. However, under current the supermajority requirement, 60 votes are needed to get them passed. Biden said that if Republicans don't cooperate, then the supermajority requirement called the filibuster should be tossed to get the Voting Rights Acts through. The popular perception of a filibuster shaped by movies and TV dramas involves a lone senator speaking for hours and refusing to cede the floor in an attempt to delay or block a vote. The more prosaic reality is a rule which today requires 60 of the Senate's 100 members to move to a vote on most topics, even if the legislation itself requires only a simple majority to pass. If the minority party holds at least 41 seats, it can refuse to allow a vote in what is known as a filibuster.
It's going to be judged by history.
20 separate billion-dollar weather and climate emergencies hit the United States last year, and 2021 was the 4th warmest year in the U.S. on record, according to the UN World Meteorological Organization, or WMO. The WMO is now busy crunching those findings from the U.S. National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration together with data from 6 other leading international weather services around the world to determine just how warm 2021 was. Now, these include the European Union's Copernicus Earth Observation Program, which has just announced that 2021 was the 5th warmest year on record, and that the past 7 years taken together have been the 7 warmest on record. And to Greenland, where a new UN-endorsed report has found that for the 25th year running, its ice sheet lost more than mass through summer melting than it gained back during the winter. The data from the Danish Arctic Monitoring Service Polar Portal shows that the early summer was cold and wet, with unusually heavy and late snowfall in June, which delayed the onset of the melting season. After that, however, a heat wave at the end of July led to a considerable loss of ice. In all, the ice sheet lost around 166 billion tons during the 12-month period ending in August 2021. According to the Polar Portal report, which contributes to the work of the UN World Meteorological Organization, 2021 was also notable because there was rain at the top of the ice sheet at 3,200 meters rather than snow. And take a look. This is the World Volcano on Isabella Island of Ecuador's Galapagos Islands. And it erupted for the second time in 7 years. The World Volcano slopes host the pink iguana, only 211 of which were reported to be left on Isabella, the largest island in the Galapagos archipelago as of last August. A team of park rangers and scientists working with the iguanas confirmed that the creatures were out of harm's way. Located in the Pacific, some 1,000 kilometers off the coast of Ecuador, the Galapagos Islands are a protected wildlife area and home to unique species of flora and fauna. The archipelago was made famous by British geologist and naturalist Charles Darwin. The World Volcano last erupted in 2015 after 33 years of inactivity without affecting local wildlife. And the World Bank Group said that the global economy is entering a pronounced slowdown amid fresh threats from COVID-19 variants and a rise in inflation, debt, and income inequality that could endanger the recovery in emerging and developing economies. Given the rapid spread of Omicron variant, the COVID-19 pandemic will continue to disrupt economic activity in the near term, according to the Global Economic Prospects Report. Again, let's listen in.
Going forward, we are projecting a pronounced slowdown. And the numbers are very clear. Global economy delivered 5.5% growth last year. It's a remarkable number. But going forward, this year, we will see growth around 4%. And the next year, that number is going to go down to 3%. Why? Because basically, pent-up demand will not be there. Demand is going to be smaller. In addition, policymakers around the world are withdrawing these support measures. So the policy support is going to be withdrawn. So between those two, we will have a slowdown. Of course, there are risks down the road, and those risks are significant. COVID is still with us. We are experiencing, of course, the Omicron wave. Debt levels are quite high. We have inflationary pressures, we have climate-related challenges. When you put all of these with very limited policy space in emerging market developed economies, these risks increase the possibility of a hard landing. In a nutshell, we have slowing growth, we have withdrawn policy support, and we have a plethora of risks that increases the possibility of a hard landing. Policymakers need to be proactive to get ahead of these risks and mitigate that possibility of prospects. Now, at the global level, I think the message is very clear. We need aggressive global cooperation in vaccines, in debt relief, and in climate change. All of these will require global community acting together and taking these challenges seriously and implementing the policies necessary.
In the U.S., the Federal Reserve is going to be very attentive to the economy and will adapt pretty nimbly its policy amid risk of persistent inflation, according to Jerome Powell, telling this to lawmakers during a hearing on his nomination for a second term at the helm of the central bank. Let's listen in.
But that's going to depend on data. It's going to depend on the progress we see on the supply side, the progress we see on inflation. And we honestly don't know. There's risk on both sides, really, on growth. and potentially on inflation as well. So we're going to have to be just very attentive to what's happening in the economy and willing to adapt pretty nimbly our policy as we go through the year.
Economists are projecting that government data due out today will show annual consumer price inflation hitting 7% in December, its highest level in 40 years. And the issue dominated the questions from senators. But the Fed chief attributed most of the price surge to a mismatch between supply and demand caused by global logistics snarls, although policymakers are also watching wage growth carefully. And raising interest rates and otherwise removing the extraordinary stimulus the Federal Reserve provided to the U.S. economy during the COVID-19 pandemic will not harm the labor market. That according again to Central Bank Chief Jerome Powell. Let's listen in.
Effects on the employment market.
Businesses nationwide have complained that they struggle to fill open positions and record numbers of workers have left their jobs, while the share of adults in the labor force has barely budged in recent months, even as wages have risen.
From where we are right now, we are very...
Novak Djokovic admitted errors in his travel papers and in not isolating after a claimed coronavirus infection as he battled to stay in Australia and fight for a record 21st Grand Slam. Take a look. The world number one said his team had offered fresh information to the Australian government, which is pondering whether to cancel his visa again and throw him out of the country. Immigration Minister Alex Hawke says he is considering canceling the visa another time as fresh doubts emerge. Djokovic, a 9-time Australian Open champion, described reports about his post-infection outings in Serbia as misinformation. On the day after his claimed positive test in Serbia, Djokovic appeared at a youth tennis event at a ceremony to honor him with stamps bearing his image, both apparently without a mask. Djokovic, who made no mention of his stamp ceremony, said he only received the PCR test result after attending the children's tennis event. But he also admitted that he also went ahead with an interview and photo shoot with French sports newspaper L'Equipe on December 18. The player said he also had 2 rapid antigen tests, which both returned negative results. One on December 16 when he first suspected being infected, and one on December 17 before attending the children's tennis event. The tennis ace also admitted a mistake on his Australian travel declaration in which a box was ticked indicating that he had not or would not travel in the 14 days before taking his flight to Melbourne. In fact, social media posts and reports show he flew to Serbia to Spain, from Serbia to Spain during that period. And this was submitted by support team on my behalf, according to Djokovic. He also apologized. He said, "My agent sincerely apologizes for the administrative mistake in ticking the incorrect box about my previous travel before coming to Australia. This was a human error and certainly not deliberate." Meanwhile, Australia's Victorian State Premier Daniel Andrews said the tennis tournament is much bigger than any one person and stands by that he will not request the Commonwealth government to exempt certain people for vaccination. The country's government is pondering to cancel tennis superstar Novak Djokovic's visa again after the world number one scored a surprise courtroom victory on Monday. Again, let's listen in.
The issue of who gets into the country and their vaccination status, though, is not a matter for state governments. I don't issue visas. The Commonwealth government does that. This is a very active process. As you know, there was a court ruling last evening. Whether that's appealed is a matter for the Commonwealth government. Whether the immigration minister uses his quite extraordinary powers, that's a matter for him. I stand by our comments. I was asked the question, would we be asking the Commonwealth government to exempt certain people from the requirement to be vaccinated? No. That was the answer then. That's the answer now. This tournament is much bigger than any one person. It's a Grand Slam. It's the biggest thing in tennis in the first quarter of the year, every year. It's a massive event for us. and it's bigger than any one person, whether that be, in the court or on the court.
And the news continues here on Eagle News. We'll be right back.
Ngayong may pandemya, marami ang walang trabaho at mataas ang presyo ng bilihin. Isa sa nakikitang solusyon para makaiwas sa pagkagutom ay ang pagtatanim. May ilan problemado sa espasyo dahil maliit ang kanilang lugar. Pero may sagot riyan para makapagtanim, ang hydroponics. Sa hydroponics, hindi ginagamitan ng lupa ang pinagtataniman, kundi tubig at nutrient solution lamang. Sa hydroponics, makakapagtanim ka ng gulay at kahit anong halaman. Masusolusyonan ang problema sa kagutuman at matutugunan ang seguridad sa pagkain.
Let's all get together sa pinakabagong game show na handog ng Net25 na agad-agad ang hatid na surprises at cash prizes.
Ano ang tawag sa matinding takot sa injection? Ha? Op! Meaning disqualify ka na. Dito lang sa question na to. Dito lang sa round ito. Excited ka eh. Takot-takot nga eh.
Ilang buwan na ipinagbubuntis ng African elephant ang kanyang baby. Gracia. Gracia, sino naman ang pipiliin mong sasagot ng tanong na yan?
I refuse.
You refuse?
Second yung law. Player has the right to choose.
Gumagana ba to?
Magkano yan?
Masakit yung kamay ko eh.
Hindi ganyan. Parang galit ka na eh.
Sakit eh.
Kailangan suwabe pang romansa especially. Yan! Ganyan. Ito, pangako namin sa inyo, mas magiging exciting at mas masaya pa ang mga darating na episodes. Bakit mo pinasa sa kanya?
Nakakita kasi ako ng mga numbers.
Para yung takot ka, ano?
Takot ako sa
Akala mo, madadali lang ang mga ano namin dito. Kailangan lang matapang ka rin. Pero di ba rin, meron pa tayo. Okay, agad-agad ay nais namin magpasalamat sa patuloy ninyong panonood at pagsubaybay sa ating programa. Ako ang inyong Tara Game Master, Aga Mulak para sa Tara Game! Agad-agad!
Goldfish may have short memories, but according to an Israeli university study, they might be able to drive. Take a look. Now, researchers at Ben Gurion University of the Negev found that a goldfish's innate navigational abilities allowed it to steer a robotic vehicle towards a terrestrial target if given a food reward. To conduct their unusual experiment, the team placed a fish tank on a set of motorized wheels. A camera system then recorded the fish's movements in the water and translated it into navigational directions, effectively moving the contraption in the direction where the fish bumped up against the glass. In a video released by the university, the fish can be seen driving the vehicle toward a visual target, a colorful mark on the wall of the experiment room, visible through the clear sides of the tank. When the fish steered the vehicle to the mark, it received a food reward. Now, after a few days of training, the fish navigated to the target, the university team said in a press release, and the peer-reviewed research published in the Behavioral Brain Research Journal said it hints that navigational ability is universal rather than specific to the environment, according to Satchar Given, a PhD student at the university's Life Sciences Department who worked on the experiment. I would like to say hello and good evening to our friends, to Ka Celso and Jackie Donor, and the Alarcon family who is watching us right now. Hello po sa inyo. And as always, I'll end the day on a thoughtful note. Challenges may often come our way, but sometimes it takes a good fall to know where we really stand. And this has been Eagle News International. I'm Alma Angeles. Stay alert and stay informed because we live in interesting times. Good night.
Napapansin ba ninyo, lumiliwanag ang mundo pag magkasama tayo? Life is so much sweeter, everything feels better pag tayong lahat ay together.